Welcome to this EFRAG outreach event on sustainability reporting. This is a recording of the materials that have been presented during our event on the 15th of June and highlights the main topics that we discussed and presented on that day. So as I mentioned, we had a hybrid outreach event aimed to providing both knowledge about the new standards, but also to obtain input from the participants and feedback as part of the current ongoing consultation process. The objective of this recording is to share with you the key topics that were discussed and that were presented on, so that you have in a kind of 1 hour slot an overview of the key points that we discussed, both on the developments in the CSRD as well as the ESRS that I will be talking about later on. All of these presentations and the content is on a personal view basis and is based on the status of developments as at the 15th of June 2022. So what we will be talking about, first of all, I will give a brief presentation about the CSRD and the ESRS, and then we'll also have a presentation of the chair of the project task force by Patrick de Cambour. After that, we'll have presentations on the two cross-cutting standards, ESRS 1 and ESRS 2. During the event, we also had further breakout sessions in respect of environment, social and governance. We will address the highlights of these standards also as part of this recording. Further information about especially Q&As that were asked during our outreach event are available in written format on our website and can be read for further detail. So first of all, 40 years of reporting in the Netherlands. And let's introduce myself a little bit further as well. I am Gerard van Santen and I'm the chair of the Dutch Accounting Standards Board, the Raad voor Jaarverslaggeving. And it's always good, before you start with something new, to have a little bit of a look back on where are we coming from. The Dutch Accounting Standards Board was actually set up in 1981. And that also means that in last September, we actually celebrated our 40th year anniversary of the Dutch Accounting Standards Board. Unfortunately, at that time, there wasn't really the possibility to organize any events. So therefore, it's really great that now in June 2022, we have been able to host this hybrid outreach event with the current developments on sustainability reporting. If we then go back a little bit further in history, then the first guidelines on financial reporting were published by the Dutch Accounting Standards Board in 1982. But about 20 years later, we were also one of the first ones that actually published a guide to sustainability reporting, our handreiking maatschappelijke verslaggeving. At that point in time, also from our stakeholders, sustainability and especially sustainability reporting was already a topic on the agenda. If we then see that in 2005, the EU implemented IFRS for listed entities, and that's about 20 years after we started with our first financial reporting guidelines, we see now a similar development that also the EU is now developing its sustainability reporting requirements about 20 years after we had also developed our first guide to sustainability reporting. That doesn't mean that we were the ones that invited sustainability reporting, because there are a lot of other parties involved in that as well, but it is to give you an impression of how the developments were in recent years. Of course, in 2017, the non-financial reporting directive was already implemented, but that only applied to a certain listed entities, while what we're going to discuss today on the CSRD and the ESRS is going to be applicable for a much wider group and is also broader if we look at the content. But this is a little bit to give an historic perspective over the past 40 years. Now we're going to a video message from Sven Gentner, the head of the unit of corporate reporting in the European Commission, who's going to explain about the CSRD.
Hello and welcome to your local EFRAG outreach event. My name is Sven Gentner and I'm head of unit for corporate reporting in the European Commission. EFRAG has kindly invited me to say a few words on the context of today's event. As you all know, over the past 5 years, sustainability has moved from the margins to the mainstream with astonishing speed. It is now at the heart of commercial affairs and at the heart of finance. Financial markets are crucial for our transition to a more sustainable and climate-neutral economy. This is why the European Commission proposed the Directive on Corporate Sustainability Reporting, the CSRD, in June of 2021. The objectives of the CSRD are to reduce systemic risk to the financial system arising from climate change and other sustainability issues, to make capital flow to companies that address and do not aggravate the sustainability crisis more easy, and to make companies more accountable for their impacts on people and the environment. Our two watchwords for this proposal were clarity and coherence. First, markets and businesses need more clarity. Today, there is no standard for disclosing sustainability information. By developing European sustainability disclosure standards, we can build consensus on what information investors, NGOs, and other stakeholders can demand from companies. Second, markets and businesses also need coherence. Coherence means that economic activities need to align with the goals described in the European Green Deal and confirmed in the European climate law. We need a strong alignment between the disclosure standards for issuers, the taxonomy indicators, and indicators that are being used by financial market participants. To allow investors to get the full picture, they need to know both a company's risk exposure and its impacts on people and the environment. That is the principle of double materiality. The risk of greenwashing can seriously undermine investor confidence, whereas high-quality reporting on companies' impacts on society and the environment is key to fostering trust in sustainable investment products. Of course, consistency within the EU is important, but it is not enough. We also need as much global alignment as possible, which requires constructive engagement from all sides. The Commission and EFRAG are engaging actively with the ISSB and with other bodies from other jurisdictions. Finally, a few words on process. We hope that the negotiations between the European Parliament, the Council, and the European Commission on the CSRD can be finalized this month. Nevertheless, in line with the urgency of this topic, the development of the sustainability reporting standards called for by the CSRD has already progressed very far. EFRAG's project task force started its work in 2021, and a public consultation on the draft standards is now open until the 8th of August of this year. The drafts that will be presented to you today are the result of a substantial amount of work by a large group of different stakeholders and experts. The European Commission is very grateful to the project task force and to EFRAG for the excellent work done over the last year. It is now very important that all relevant stakeholders' views are considered to obtain reporting standards that are fit for purpose. I'm glad that EFRAG is organizing a large number of events to allow stakeholders to give their feedback on the draft standards. Please do make your views heard and do participate in the public consultation. Once EFRAG has considered all the input to the public consultation and finalized the draft standards, it will be for the European Commission to turn them into European law. We all know that this project has been and will remain challenging, but we should not forget that it is an important part of Europe's answer to a pressing real-world problem. Without the force of financial markets, we will not be able to meet our climate and sustainability goals. I would like to thank you for participating in today's event and for giving us your important input on the draft sustainability reporting standards.
This video was very interesting from Sven, and I've summarized some of his key messages. Because he explained on why did the European Commission take the initiative on the CSRD, what it aims to achieve, and where they are in certain elements of the process. But what I would like to reiterate is the CSRD objectives. And that is not that reporting is a goal by itself, but the reporting is a mean to achieve the broader goals of the EU in respect of its European Green Deal. And to kind of repeat the three main objectives is first of all to reduce the systematic risk to the financial system, especially related to climate change and sustainability issues, to make capital flow to companies that focus on improving sustainability, and to make companies more accountable for the impact on people and environment. As he also mentioned, the consultation is currently still going on. The final deadline for that is the 8th of August, and it's really relevant there that the ESRS are ultimately made fit for purpose. And therefore it's very important to make also your views heard as part of this public consultation. Well, we have already obtained live feedback during our live outreach event, but you can also still provide feedback through the online survey that's available on the EFRAG website. But you can also directly approach the Dutch Accounting Standards Board if you have any feedback, and we will incorporate that into our process, as at this moment we are still working on our comment letter in that perspective. And ultimately a main message from also Sven's video that I would like to repeat. It's a challenging project, but we should not forget that it's an important part of Europe's answer to a pressing real-world problem. And without the force of the financial market and effectively having the capital invested into sustainable activities, it will not be possible to meet our climate and sustainability goals. And that's ultimately really what we want to achieve, or what the EU wants to achieve with this development. If I then give a very high-level overview of the scope of the CSRD, and as I mentioned, this recording is based on the situation as per the 15th of June, and at that moment the trilogue discussions between the European Parliament, European Council and the European Member States are still going on and still need to be finalized. But what will the CSRD contain? Effectively the requirement to include a sustainability report as part of the director's report. It needs to be in compliance with the CSRD, that's the level 1 guidance, and the ESRS, which is the level 2 more detailed guidance, and limited assurance is expected by the external assurance provider or the auditor. And a key concept is really that it is about double materiality. So the reporting is both about what's the impact of sustainability matters on the company, but especially also what's the impact by the company on sustainability matters. To whom will this reporting apply? Effectively to all listed entities with a few minor exemptions, but additionally also to any large corporates who at least meet 2 of the 3 following criteria as mentioned on the slides, and these criteria are effectively the same as when you need to determine for financial reporting purposes whether you qualify as a large entity. So these criteria are comparable in that perspective. Additionally, there will also be certain group exemptions. For the details on the group exemptions, that still needs to be worked out, and that will be in the final CSRD, but on a very high level some of these exemptions will be similar to the group exemptions that we're familiar with for financial reporting purposes. Based on the latest information, we're expecting that for the listed entities to which the NRVD currently also applies, need to report over the financial year 2024, and that's effectively the same scope for the NRVD, and that all other large entities will need to report over the financial year 2025. And that means, for example, when I'm talking about the financial year 2025, that will be the report that will be published in the first half of 2026. So still some time to go, but also an awful lot of amount of work to be done to make these deadlines. Then it's good to briefly talk about who sets the standards for sustainability reporting. I already mentioned the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, that's effectively the level 1 guidance. That is set by the European Commission, after approval also by the European Parliament and Member States. And then also the European Commission will ultimately approve the European Sustainability Reporting Standards that will set out in more detail how you need to prepare your sustainability report. However, the Commission has asked EFRAG to actually prepare those ESRS as an advice. EFRAG is a public-private partnership with European stakeholder organizations like Business Europe, Accountancy Europe, EFAS, so also representing investors, the national standard setters like the Dutch Accounting Standards Board, but also NGOs, trade unions, academics, and effectively the wider public. And that also relates because we are talking about double materiality. Finally, there are also observers like the Commission itself, ESMA, the ECB, etc. And ultimately, EFRAG will issue an advice to the Commission on these sustainability reporting standards. EFRAG is, technically speaking, an acronym of the European Financial Reporting Advisory Group, but clearly this is about non-financial reporting, so we'll just refer to that as EFRAG. Then finally, what's the Dutch participation in EFRAG? I already mentioned that we are one of the member organizations of EFRAG and really contributing to that. We have specific Dutch board members. One of them is Simon Braaksma, also one of the presenters of this recording, representing the Dutch Accounting Standards Board. But for example, also Wim Bartels from Accountancy Europe and David Vermeijs from Shift as NGO. We also have Dutch representatives in the technical expert group of EFRAG, Alexandra van Selm from the SER, and there are many other Dutch participants at EFRAG and PTF level. So that really helps in also providing the Dutch perspective and the Dutch input in the preparing these standards. Then what are based on the current situation the main provisions of the draft CSRD? And that's effectively an overall set of reporting topics covering the three main ESG topics. So overall that means that in respect of these topics, disclosure needs to be provided about the business model and strategy, what are sustainability objectives, what's the progress, what are actions, policies in place, and also to actually report on what are the actual results, what are the indicators being used from a double materiality perspective. And also when you look at the time horizon, it's about also the short period, so let's say the next 1 or 2 years, medium 2 to 5 years, but also the long-term perspective, so that's up to 10 or 20 years. And it's not only about the entity itself, but it's also about the value chain. So that can mean suppliers, customers, also they need to be integrated in certain aspects in the reporting, so it's broader about the value chain. And then this all needs to be provided about three main topics. So the E from environment, the S from social, and the G from governance. And we'll talk more about those three topics later on in this presentation. Just then to have a brief overview of the exposure draft ESRS, effectively 13 standards, where we have 2 cross-cutting standards, then 5 standards on environment, 4 on social, 2 on governance, and a number of appendices that are providing additional information and guidance. And by now also the basis of conclusions have been published that are related to each of these standards. But it's especially to see there's an overall cross-cutting perspective and then environment, social and governance. In this recording we will also address that, and we'll also show this picture a couple of times. And before we're going into that detail ourselves, it is great to also have Patrick de Cambour here. He's the chair of the project task force, first on non-financial reporting and then on developing the draft ESRS. And he's also one of the members of the EFRAG Sustainability Reporting Board. And he will present about how EFRAG, and especially the project task force, has developed the draft standards and what the main challenges, opportunities, but also the area of feedback that he is looking for.
It is my pleasure to be with you today to present the overall process and architecture of the European sustainability reporting standards. Next slide, please. Next, this is a classical disclaimer. So the process to start with. We had the possibility to work in the PTF for 11 months in project mode. You might remember that when the Commission tabled the CSRD proposal, then on April 21, it was soon realized that the ambition required in terms of timing, required the draft standards to be ready very quickly. So we received a request from Commissioner McGuinness in May 2021 to start elaborating draft standards in project mode as soon as possible. So we relaunched the task force that had been operating before to conduct preparatory work in June 2021. So 35 members from 13 different member states, supported by a secretariat of about 30 full-time equivalents, and also the input of expert working groups. We also signed a statement of cooperation, with GRI, Shift, Wiki, and we entertained a regular dialogue with the EFRAG Foundation, to start with the TRWG and then with the ISSB. And we had also a couple of meetings with the SEC, which was preparing the consultation that we know. So until Christmas, we prepared working papers on the basis of clusters. And these papers have been made publicly available. They were raw materials, so we have to be careful not to take that as a key element, because they were really modified during the first quarter of 2022, under what we call the triple review process. Triple review process means, first of all, a consensus building at the PTF level as a whole, where we had many sessions to discuss the content of the working papers in order to improve them. We also submitted the working papers to a review panel, and we asked the expert working groups for their input. At the same time, we were also receiving feedback from the European Commission DGs, and also feedback from the public authorities contributing to the PTF as observers. All of this led us to the final wrap-up meeting of the PTF on April 25 and 26, during which we approved the EDs on a no objection basis, and we transferred them to the Sustainability Reporting Board, which decided to launch the public consultation after having fine-tuned the cover note and also the questions to be asked from respondents. So the public consultation was launched at the end of April 2022. Next slide, please. What's going to happen, or what is happening now? First of all, we published the basis for conclusions, which is a supporting document which will not be adopted via delegated acts at the end of May as planned. We have organized the public consultation for 100 days, i.e. with the due date, which is August 2022. And we encourage, of course, respondents to as many respondents as possible to consider, because we are very interested by the input and the feedback we receive through the public consultation. We are organizing outreach events, or at least we are co-organizing, as it is the case for the Netherlands, and about about 12 to 15 outreach events are organized in geographies and also in by stakeholder groups, by EFRAG, in order to, one, facilitate the understanding of the EDs, and two, receive feedback. So following the public consultation, there will be an analysis conducted during the month of August, and the EFRAG TEG and Sustainability Reporting Board will have to re-deliberate between early September until mid-November, because this is the target date which has been given to us by the Commission. Following that handover to the Commission as technical advice of the draft standards, they have to conduct their own process, which is taking into account, first of all, the consultation period with the European agencies, translation into 24 languages, and also the scrutiny period of the co-legislators, Parliament and Council, because the goal is to publish the standards by the end of the first half of 2023. Next slide. So that's the project mode. And now the institutional mode. What are the key features that have to be borne in mind when considering the exposure drafts? First of all, they will have to be adjusted to meet the requirements of the final CSRD once the CSRD has been adopted by the co-legislators, hopefully before the end of June. Two, the key point, we have tried to create a cohesive and coherent environment for reporting by taking into account existing European laws and initiatives such as SFDR, taxonomy, Article 8, but also the other ones, the other legislations, and there are many, including the proposed corporate sustainability due diligence directive, which is not final, of course, so we have been careful, but we also wanted to pave the way in a reasonable manner. The third point, which I would like to highlight, is, of course, our desire and commitment to build on and contribute to the international sustainability reporting initiatives. I mentioned the statement of cooperation. I mentioned also the dialogue with the ISSB or the SEC. The architecture is designed, and that needs to be understood, to articulate properly sustainability information, the reported sustainability information. So I will explain a little bit more. We, of course, are under the umbrella of the CSRD. Level 1, i.e. the legislative level, is of course to be complied with. So we had to address the sustainability matters which are covered by Article 19b of the CSRD, and which is not under discussion in the trilogue. The core elements of the content are not really challenged. Last but not least, 2 points. This is the first step in a journey towards a faithful representation, because as you are aware, there will be other sets, in particular a second set that will address the reporting for SMEs and the reporting for large entities under a sector-specific dimension. And second point, we certainly hope to receive a fruitful feedback from the public consultation to fine-tune the relevance of the disclosures that we suggest, and to promote and foster comparability to the maximum extent possible. But we also want to know if there are prioritization or phasing in options that are coming from the consultation, because this is a key point for us. Next slide. The architecture which you will consider during the outreach, is composed of 13 standards, 2 cross-cutting standards, addressing the principles, which we call the overall umbrella, and also the cross-cutting disclosures, because we realized, of course, that certain disclosures need to be absolutely cross-cutting, like, for instance, the interaction between sustainability matters and strategy and business models, the interaction between sustainability matters and governance, and also, as a pivotal element, the assessment of impacts, risks, and opportunities, processes, and outcome of the processes. So under these cross-cutting standards, we developed at PTF level 3 categories of topical standards as required by the PTF, 5 for environment, following, the classification which is proposed by the taxonomy, climate, mitigation and adaptation, water, pollution, biodiversity, and circular economy. For social, 4 standards, 1 dedicated to the own workforce, 1 dedicated to the workforce in the value chain, and 1 to the affected communities, and 1 to the end users and consumers. And on governance, 1 on general governance and 1 on business conduct. So this architecture is trying to structure properly the reporting, which the EU is considering as a second pillar of standardized corporate reporting in connectivity with financial reporting. Next slide. The main success factors are that we have tried to foster are the following. The first one is, of course, we focused on the quality of information, in particular relevance and sector agnostic comparability, because we certainly want to promote the end of the alphabet soup and the lack of reliability of sustainability data. The second point, we wanted absolutely to create a coherence within the EU between the various policy objectives and regulations in terms of content and timing. We also wanted to pave the way to the compatibility with international initiatives, whatever their stage of evolution. We also felt that it was necessary to promote the exercise of judgment by the reporting entity under the control of its governance and its auditors to foster a proportionate implementation. This is a point that is sometimes misunderstood, but where I think you will need to consider carefully what would be the alternatives. Of course, a balanced combination between narrative and quantitative, because unlike financial reporting, narrative information is key in sustainability reporting. We do not have the luxury of a quantitative system that is perfect, with debits equal to credits, and we have to explain, we have to consider various units of accounts, and therefore narrative information and narrative with quantitative information are key. Of course, a seamless standardized corporate reporting between financial and sustainability is one of our goals. And finally, for at least in the first step, we feel that the presentation had to be flexible. So that's why we have 3 options for the sustainability statements, and we consider that it is possible to incorporate by reference. Sometimes it's tricky, but we feel that we need to offer this flexibility. Next slide, please. In terms of challenges, we of course realize that it can be a real challenge for first-time reporters. and in particular the ones, yes, of course, that were not in the NFRD. And so the criteria for large is relatively low in the EU, and therefore there is a host of entities that will report for the first time. We also are not fully sure that we have reached the right depth in terms of required information, and that's why we are, of course, open to fine-tune or phase in. I insist on the challenge of fully addressing the assessment of material impacts, risks, and opportunities, and also to understand the use of the rebuttable presumption, which is a classical, by the way, tool between standard setting and implementation of standards, in particular in financial reporting. So we felt that it's a possibility, but we understand that it's not easy to understand or to implement. So we would like to receive feedback on that. This is a challenge. Boundaries are also an issue because, of course, we go beyond the perimeter of financial reporting. In doing so, EFRAG has to navigate between the expectations of stakeholders. Some want more, some want less. Users want, in general, more. Preparers are also careful for cost considerations. So we have to navigate in between to reach, in the EFRAG spirit, a reasonable consensus. And last but not least, we want to avoid multiple reportings at all cost, but not at the cost of reducing meaningfulness. So a brief word on the consultation. Next slide, please. First of all, there are 3 sections in the consultation, and this is important to understand. The first one is dedicated to the relevance. We ask questions about the relevance of the proposed architecture, the implementation of the principles, and the overall content of the 13 exposure drafts. This is relatively high level, but this is key. The second section is dedicated to the possible options for prioritizing or phasing in the implementation. And we needed also a third section, which is, of course, the one that is heavy, which is feedback on the disclosure requirements. Since there are 137 disclosure requirements, it looks very heavy. And that's why we encourage respondents to consider section 1 and section 2, and to be selective if they so wish to answer section 3. Thank you very much for your attention and for your invitation. Thank you.
Okay, I think Patrick gave a very insightful overview of how the draft ESRS were developed and what the main challenges and focus areas are. He also talked about what the specific feedback areas are from an EFRAG perspective. And you can see them here on the slide again, and I'm not going to repeat them. What I would like to focus on is on a few topics where the Dutch Accounting Standards Board is specifically focusing on. First of all, that's improving and focusing on a holistic approach of the draft ESRS. So really looking at the picture overall. And aiming at connectivity with financial and other corporate reporting, as well as, and that's the second point, alignment with international standards. That's really key because to prevent multiple reporting. The third topic is really to focusing on and further understanding materiality approach, because we really believe that the reporting should be focusing on material topics and should not be overburdened by immaterial topics. The fourth topic is what's the trickle-down effect are going to be for small and medium-sized entities. As I mentioned, the scope relates to listed and large entities. However, since the value chain is also included, it may also impact SMEs. And that's an area of focus of the Dutch Accounting Standards Board. And finally, how the complexity of the standards can be reduced as much as possible to enable the workability of the ESRS in practice, and so that we really have high quality reporting at a reasonable cost and effort in that perspective. After this general introduction of the CSRD and the ESRS, we are now going to the second session, and that's on the cross-cutting standards ESRS 1 and 2. And that will be presented by Simon Braaksma. He's the co-chair of the Sustainability Working Group of the Dutch Accounting Standards Board, but he's also a member of the Sustainability Reporting Board and working at Philips and has a broad experience in sustainability reporting. And the other presenter will be Olga Smirnova, also a co-chair of the Sustainability Working Group of the Dutch Accounting Standards Board and working on sustainability reporting at Heineken.
So thank you, Gerard. Thank you, Patrick. And thanks for all the introductions that we've seen so far. By the way, also thanks to Sven in the DG in Brussels. You've been hearing a lot about the whole process that EFRAG has been going through and how they came to the specific standards. So we think it's now time to take you by the hand and really dive into a little bit more depth. And what we will be starting with is the first two cross-cutting standards, ESRS 1 and 2. And both Olga and myself will be doing that, but maybe Olga, you can introduce yourself.
Thank you, Simon. My name is Olga Smirnova. I'm responsible for sustainability reporting in Heineken and auditor in the past. Also a member of the Sustainability Reporting Working Group at the Dutch Accounting Standards Board, together with Simon. So here to present you ESRS 1, ESRS 2.
And we in the Dutch Accounting Standards Boards have been reviewing the draft standards and now also the exposure drafts. So we hope to share a little bit of our views with you as we are going through the presentation. And first of all, an overview, and you should be able to draft this one after a couple of occasions because this slide is coming back time and again. And basically what you see at the top of the slide are the two cross-cutting standards that Olga and myself will be talking about first. Then you see the next level, a number of environmental standards. There are 5 in total. There are 4 social standards and then 2 governance standards. But the first session that we are now doing is focused on the 2 standards. I will be doing ESRS 1 and Olga will be doing ESRS 2. So cross-cutting standards, general principles. And what is important, I think, for all of you is that also the standards that we will be presenting have a layered approach, basically. And the first layer, and that is what you will see here, is company agnostic. And that basically means they apply to every company. Then, secondly, EFRAG will be developing, upon the request of the Commission, sector-specific standards. And lastly, you can, as a company, disclose entity-specific information, and that is what is called the rule of 3. So first, sector agnostic, it applies to everybody, then stuff that will apply, or disclosure requirements that apply to your specific industry, and lastly, entity specifics. So what you will see on this slide is a number of key elements, key principles that apply to all the standards that you will be seeing later today. So first of all, there's an alignment, of course, with the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. There are specific sector agnostic and entity specific disclosures, sector agnostic and specific standards. And lastly, there is a specific detail in the standard the first standard, the ESRS 1, that gives you a lot of detailed disclosures that you normally have. If you compare to your financial disclosures, you have that in the financial statements that talk about the scope, the boundaries, and what have you. I'll come to that in a moment in a little bit more detail. So an important element, and I think that is very important for all of you to understand. We have heard earlier from a number of academics who did investigate the disclosures and the assurance that is being provided with listed companies, and there about 50% of the listed companies in the year 2021 had assurance on their non-financial reporting, only 50% for listed companies. Well, whether you call it good or bad news, basically the Commission also expects or demands basically that there will be assurance on all the ESG disclosures. So that is very important for you to know. So, and with that comes a lot of responsibility, because yes, you can have, just information that you throw over to the accountant and ask them to provide assurance on that, but that will be a very burdensome and, uneconomical way of working. It really means that you don't only need to have the data, you also need to have internal controls, you need to have policies, standards, and what have you, and that comes with all of that that is being included in the ESRS 1 standard. Another very important topic apart from the assurance, and the assurance, by the way, is at limited level. So it's not the highest reasonable assurance, but it's limited. But still, if I say that today only 50% of listed companies have that, you better start engaging with your accountant in a timely manner what that all means for you, because it is a big impact. A second very important element here is about double materiality. And maybe, Olga, you can shed a little bit of light. It is covered in ESRS 2, but maybe now that it's on the slide, you can dwell on this for a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Materiality, double materiality in particular, is the concept introduced in ESRS, and it is going as a red thread through the entire set of standards, and ESRS 1 and 2 speak about it, 2 in much more detail. So this is very important and a core concept of the entire set of the standards. Double materiality means that all the preparers need to assess what information is considered to be material and disclose it. So you need to make an assessment, looking at your environment you operate, talking to your stakeholders, both internal and external, and assess what topics are material. But important point, it's a double materiality. We look at impact from both angles, whether it's impact of the company on the external environment, or whether it's how the external environment is impacting the company, the preparer or undertaking, using terminology of the standards. And this is a very important concept, because all companies, actually preparers in the beginning, but afterwards users, need to look from both angles when they decide what standards are material for them and hence disclosed, or if the entire standard is applicable, perhaps individual articles and disclosure requirements can be taken out because they are of less materiality. Preparers need to explain it as well, and here we talk to another important concept introduced in the standards, which is rebuttable presumption. Rebuttable presumption means that preparers have to explain and provide evidence first to, well, themselves, then assurance providers and to the external world, the stakeholders and users of the information, on why particular elements have been excluded from the scope based on materiality assessment. And this is a very important point which we would like to attract your attention. Please read the standard in detail and also provide your comments, of course, if you would like, in the consultation which is being in process now. But these are underlying principles of the entire set of standards, and we find them extremely important.
Yeah, and maybe just to add my 2 cents, what it means is basically that the premise is, the working assumption, all the standards are applicable to everybody, notwithstanding the results of your materiality assessment. So if you are a temp agency and, for example, pollution is hopefully not, a material topic to you, according to the rebutable presumption, you need to prove really that it's not material, even if it doesn't appear in your materiality analysis as material. You still need to go through that effort, and then also write this down, because also the standard says that you really need to give all the details in your management report why something is not material, and you make use of the rebutable presumption.
Exactly.
Yeah, so that is a very important topic that you need to consider really, and you may agree or disagree. Anyhow, we are looking for your feedback on this topic because it's a really important principle that you need to consider. Let's then move over to the next topic, and that is boundaries and value chain. That's basically the third topic that is very relevant for you, because what the standard says is it isn't only about, in my case, Philips, it is also the supply chain, and basically not specifically to ESRS 1, but later when we look at the climate standard, for example, also the use phase of our products. So we call that scope 3, but we'll come to that in a bit. But what is really important is that the boundaries basically extend to the value chain. And there should be a complete alignment with, for example, the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive. But whether that is fully aligned or not yet, that is to be seen. But very important for you, if you talk about later, for example, the workers, there's also a standard that talks about the conditions for the workers in the supply chain. And that is a significant extension to what we have in many of the disclosures today. With regard to the time horizon, very simple, because if you report financially over the year, starting in the 1st of January till the 31st of December, no surprise that also the ESG information should be on the 1st of January to the 31st of December. And then, of course, due diligence already mentioned, and the link to the CSDDD, the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive. You know, there's a lot, you cannot just write down without having a good underpinning. There should be sufficient due diligence being performed by the company. Now, Olga already referred to the concept of double materiality, so I won't dwell too much on it, but very important, you know, the impact of you, your society on the company, as well as you on society at large. So that is very important to understand. And here we see it again, and the topic of the rebutable presumption that Olga already dwelt on. Double materiality, again, a number of specific steps here. And then you come also to the entity-specific disclosures that I referred to in the beginning, and in the end you've got the material disclosure requirements for the undertaking. So it's the concept of, or the principle of three that was mentioned. As I already alluded to, the value chain, here you see it again visualized in the slide. So it's basically, you know, my own company and all the consolidated entities that are in scope, but then also the impact, risk and opportunities in both the supply chain as well as in the downstream value chain. And of course, you know, you cannot report without having policies, procedures and systems in place and internal controls in order to keep your assurance cost a little bit to a manageable level. So there needs to be a lot of work done by all of you if you haven't started it. And I think that is the key message that Olga and myself, but also the other speakers, convey to you. You know, this is very impactful, so better start, you know, understanding what is written down in the exposure drafts. They are, you know, not the final version, but they're exposure drafts asking for comments by all of you. So please read them and start also, you know, gathering people in your organization, involve more people. If you look, for example, at the governance standard that will be dwelt on by Eva a little bit later, you know, you need to get your legal folks involved. If you're talking about impact in the supply chain, you know, you need to get your supply chain colleagues really involved. So that is important. You cannot do that just by a couple of people in finance or in the sustainability team. It's basically a big team effort, and also only by that token it's manageable because it's a lot of work. Lastly, before I hand over to Olga, is the presentation. And Patrick said already in his words that there is a basically a number of options provided, and they're here on the slide, in fact under 6.2. First of all, you can have a separate single identifiable section. So you could imagine that you've got your report, and then there is a chapter that says ESG. And in that, you've got everything that is being described in the requirements, the disclosure requirements have there. What you can also do is have 4 separate identifiable aspects where you've got the cross-cutting standards, the E, S, and G. But what you also can do, and that is, I think, will be completely illegible, but it's an option. It basically says report per standard, and then you get, you know, everything that is on the cross-cutting again, but then E, you know, and all the different disclosure requirements of every individual standard, then the S and the G. It may suit your purpose. It's good, I think, that EFRAG and the Commission are not that prescriptive. They give a little bit of flexibility. But the key message that we want to give to you, and something to consider as well, is that today the assumption is that everything that you're disclosing will be part of the management report. So we already did some assessments as to the inflation in the number of pages that you have. Please also, when you're reading those standards, keep that in the back of your mind. Do a gap analysis, but also think about what it will mean to you. And then, do you agree with the, you know, the position of EFRAG at this moment in the standards that it all should be part of the management report? Or should you maybe have this more aligned with financial reporting, where you've got your management disclosure and analysis, you know, a description of how the year went and some highlights, and then financial statements that give all the details of the P&L, balance sheet, cash flow, equity schedule, and what have you. So it's really up to you to have an opinion on that, but please give that feedback to us as well, because we can speak to, you know, for ourselves, and we try to reach out to as many people as possible, but feedback from you is really relevant. And without further ado, I hand over to Olga for ESRS 2.
Thank you, Simon. Cross-cutting standards number 2, general strategy, governance, and materiality assessment, an important standards to get familiar with because it explains the underlying principles which go across all the standards on actually how we should set up the governance, how we need to set up respective strategies and targets and action plans. And again, a very important topic which we discussed, how to start with the risk assessment and materiality assessment to have impact and financial assessments. I'm going to the... Oh.
The one at the top.
Oh.
No, this one.
Yes. The ESRS 2 standard has 22 disclosure requirements, again, which are underlying principles of the entire set. That's why it's very important to get familiar with those. They explain, again, principles and disclosure requirements for the general layout of ESRS 1, which Simon just explained. Again, they are not subject, this one is important. ESRS 2 is not subject to rebuttable presumption. So this is the only standard which is exempt, which means that all the preparers have to, or the undertakings have to follow these standards and the guidelines set out in these standards. And this standard also provide context for the topical standards, which we will discuss later on, but were already mentioned before. And again and again, I cannot repeat it less, materiality assessment is the first step in this process. Objectives and overview. Objective of ESRS 2, again, the starting point of it. We talk about the setting up the disclosure requirements of the undertaking, and again, they are of cross-cutting nature. They are of, sorry, I just got, if you could cut it for a second. No, please start. I will restart again from this one. Mm-hmm. Yeah, just I'll tell you. Let me collect my thoughts. Let me quickly go through this because it's too much. Yeah. Okay. The ESRS 2 standard sets out the general principles for reporting, and this applies to all standards, all 14 standards, and particular topical standards of ESRS suite. This explains how undertakings should set up strategy and business model and reflect sustainability, all sustainability elements in it, how governance in relation to sustainability should be set up to make sure that effectively strategy and actions and goals are in place and drive the ambition and agenda of the undertakings towards set sustainability targets. How materiality assessment is performed. This standard lays out in detail the key principles for assessment of materiality, which we spoke before, but again, we're speaking about impact and financial angles of this, and how risks and opportunities are to be assessed. Because we, of course, speak more about risks, but opportunities is also important topic which is brought up, because it's not only reverse size of risk, but also an important development focus. General characteristics. On this slide, you can see the general characteristics and chapters. It explains how reporting should be set up. It again a little bit refers to back how the reporting should be positioned. And again, there are 3 options with a preference given to the first one. So when we have a full round dedicated section on sustainability, which is visible, which is actually will be helped by tagging in the future when technology will come to help us, and similar to financial reporting with XBRL or similar technology, sustainability information will be also tagged for the use of investors and other stakeholders. It explains sectors of the activity and refers to the sector split standards, because you, of course, need to keep in mind what sectors you are, and later on sector-specific standards will come as well, but that will be later. Key features of the value chain, what Simon already mentioned. Please always remember, it is not only own production, for example, or own operations. Standards look into the value chain, and it's very important because it's, again, it's speaking as a preparer, it's one of the most complex topics when it comes to impact and also collecting information reliable and from the first source, primary information, for example. Key drivers of the value creator, again, it speaks how company undertakings create value. There are some specific elements, like using approximations, for example, or errors and other elements, which gives a practical guidance on how we should report and how we should reflect certain very specific elements in our statements, which is sometimes very close to financial statements from my memory. For example, estimation uncertainty and changes, for example, in the preparations, whether due to changes in the methodology applied or due to errors identified in the previous periods. It also talks about other sustainability reporting pronouncements and general statement of compliance. So these are legal principles which we speak about, so we have to declare that we are reporting in line with ESRS. And it deep dives in the strategy and business model. So this gives overview of strategy and business model. We need to declare and describe how the views, interests, and of our stakeholders are considered, because that's a very important input, and that also defines, in particular, materiality, but also disclosures which we make. Interaction of impacts of this strategy. So we need to declare and disclose how the impacts which were identified and are connected to the strategy, because undertakings have to prove that their strategy is driving their performance towards certain sustainability goals. And interaction of risks and opportunities, and again the strategy, because all these elements need to be connected, so that puts quite a lot of pressure, in a good sense, of course, to connect all these elements together and to prove to our stakeholders that all these elements serve towards moving the strategy towards a certain targets. Not only we're talking about transparency, please bear in mind, like sometimes we're used to in finance, standards are asking us to go to the sustainability goals set either internationally or in particular by EU, and that's a very important element of it. And our strategies, individual strategies, should cater for this. Going further through specific disclosure requirements, again, on governance, on impacts, risks, and opportunities. So we're just walking along the standards. In governance, we have to explain how the governance bodies are organized, what roles and responsibilities they have, how information flows are organized, both how information on sustainability-related topic is fed to the governance bodies and how decisions are taken. So standards lay out quite a detailed set of requirements on this. And sometimes you will see that it might be very close to your general governance and strategy, but it's also proof that sustainability should be very closely intertwined with the general business strategy and the governance of the company. Again, it speaks about incentive schemes and due diligence, which Simon mentioned. So all these elements, which are currently the elements of a sustainable business with a sustainable strategy, are spelled out and with quite detailed requirements. Impacts, risks, and opportunities. The standard explains how the risks and opportunities assessments to be performed. Of course, you can use your methodology and follow the principles which you are either already following or would like to follow, but the general call-out is the same. You have to assess risks, you have to disclose them, and you have to connect your strategy and overall the governance model to those. Going further, again comes back the statements on due diligence. This is a very important, and as Simon mentioned, we not only talk about simple transparency. Transparency is extremely important, but the standards nudge and ask us, quite imperatively, to have a due diligence process. We do need to assess our environment, whether we talk about environmental matters or social matters. We need to screen where the risks are, and we need to translate it into specific actions, which we also have to prove. You will see it coming back in the topical standards that we are asked to also disclose action plans and prove that we walk the talk, which is actually quite a challenge for many preparers, but it's of course a very important move to show that we are all moving towards the same goal. We already spoke about materiality assessment. You can see quite some detail, and you will get the standards, of course, afterwards as the materials. So I will not go through that, but again, we're talking about impact and financial materiality. So this is a very important principle, and I think with this, I will complete my story.
Yeah, but maybe one question to you, Olga, and I think I know the answer myself, but for the people, the audience, what would be your recommendation to get going? Where would you just start reading the first standard and then continue with the last one? Would there be specific material that EFRAG created already that you could advise people to use?
It's a very good question. So EFRAG already provide a lot of assets and materials for the users to help us to get it going. They are still, the standards are still in the status of exposure drafts, but you already can find a lot of materials on the EFRAG page, especially educational sessions, which are very helpful. It's a set of slides explaining much more in detail than we were speaking now, what the standards are about, what's the key elements to watch out for, and also people who were behind, the members of the task force who were actually writing the standards and experts who were analyzing the standards, they are explaining what each standards is about and what are the most important elements. With this knowledge, of course, you can embark on reading the standards, and it's quite a big read, but of course you will already understand the logic. And
for those people who haven't seen any standard yet, is it 50 pages, 100 pages? What is the core content?
Yeah, it depends on the standards, of course. Depends if you take a climate standard, you will see there are quite some pages. The ESRS 1 and 2, they are just around 40 pages on average. So it's quite a lot, but each standard consists of the disclosure requirements section and application guidance. So these are, of course, the most important for you. And those who would like to know more, they can go to the basis for conclusion to understand how, for example, certain articles were decided and which reference points were used by the task force. Again, start with ESRS 1 and 2. They will make you understand how this whole structure works. Also read cover letter, because cover note actually explains interconnections between the standards and also references to all the underlying additional appendixes, because they contain quite a lot of information. For example, how CSRD, for example, certain ESRS are connected to CSRD, for example, or Sustainable Finance Directive. Start with those, and then, depending, of course, what you see material for you, deep dive into the topical standards.
So in summary, go to the EFRAG website, look at the educational material, the video recording of the standard that is being explained. It will give you an executive summary in about half an hour to an hour, depending on one or multiple standards being covered. And with that knowledge, start then read the standard, and you will go through them much faster than if you would just come in completely blind. Hey, that's great. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you for watching these presentations on the CSRD and all of the ESRS standards with the cross-cutting, the environmental, the social, and the governance standards. If you want to obtain more information, you can either go to the website of the Dutch Accounting Standards Board, where you can find all of the materials of the outreach event, including the Q&As that were asked during the event and that you can make yourself familiar with. You can also go to the EFRAG website. There you will find all of the actual standards, the survey for the public consultation, as well as the educational sessions. If you have any feedback that we can incorporate as a Dutch Accounting Standards Board in our comment letter, or any other questions or feedback that you may have, please send an email to the Dutch Accounting Standards Board at secretariaat@rjnet.nl. Then once more, thanks a lot for watching, thanks for your attention, and hope to see you soon again. Thank you.